Today we're going to talk about concepts that every child in the United States should understand. But because these concepts cannot be taught in public schools, hardly anyone understands them. Americanism. What is it? The Declaration of Independence tells us that men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness is the necessities and luxuries of life, and the amount of exertion we are willing to expend to obtain them. By extension, God also gave us the right to defend our lives, liberty, and property. Because we recognize that our rights are given to us from God, then no man or government is justified in taking them away. This is Americanism. Because teaching of God has been banned from public schools, then teaching of Americanism has also been banned. But Americans will let Americanism slip through their hands if they don't understand it. Even though government doesn't give us rights, we need it to secure our rights. We delegate to the government the authority that God gave us to protect our rights, so that we can have more time to pursue happiness. Let's illustrate man delegating the authority that God gave him to protect his life, liberty, and property. Consider the Wild West. The ranchers are having a hard time getting anything done because they spend all of their time defending their families and cattle from bandits. The ranchers get together and hire a sheriff to defend them from the bandits, so they can get on with the business of ranching. This doesn't mean that the ranchers have forfeited the right to defend themselves to the sheriff. They're just sharing that power with him. This is legitimate government. Consider the following scenario and try to discern if it's a legitimate use of government. Remember, government only possesses the power that we, the people, delegate to it. And you can't justly delegate power you don't actually have. Here's the scenario. The sheriff promises everyone that they'd be safer without guns, so he makes a law against gun ownership and confiscates all of the guns of the law-abiding ranchers. I hope you recognize this is not a legitimate use of government. The sheriff does not have the authority to take away the right to defend oneself with a gun, and the ranchers don't have the authority to vote away their neighbors' rights to defend themselves with a firearm. Now consider three ranchers. One has 3 horses, the other has 2 horses, and the last only has 1 horse. The 2-horse rancher feels bad for his 1-horse buddy, so he tells the sheriff to force the 3-horse rancher to give his 3rd horse to the 1-horse rancher so they can all have 2 horses. Did God give anyone the authority to take property from another by force like that? No. Well, then you can't delegate that job to the government. Government is force, and it represents you. Whatever you sanction it to do, it is as though you are doing it yourself. This is how we judge all legislation, and this is how we guide our representatives in government. Of course, the 3-horse rancher is at liberty to give his 3rd horse away. But God gave him the right to own and control his property, and no person or government can rightly take it from him. God, not the government, holds people accountable for helping the poor. Religious people understand that. By taking God out of schools and American life, the government creates the poverty problem. The founders of our country envisioned the poor being cared for by charities, and this was realistic because our country was established by a people who accepted a nation under God. The founding fathers had a different challenge to address when forming our system of government. Governments are run by humans. Human nature tends to abuse power. If humans didn't abuse power, we wouldn't need government protection from other humans. The humans running the government must have laws to stop them from overreaching the power that we delegate to them. This is what the U.S. Constitution is. The Constitution says to the government, you can only do these things. nothing else. The Constitution also spreads power out very thinly. Federal governing power is spread between three branches of government. Which is the most powerful? The legislative branch, because it is the only branch that can make laws and levy and therefore appropriate taxes. To keep this branch in check, representatives are reviewed by their constituents for re-election every 2 years. When the executive branch, the president, presumes to make law through executive orders and directives, or the country assumes that the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, has just made a new law through its ruling on a case, this is unconstitutional. If Americans understood the Constitution, would they tolerate these things? The judicial branch and the executive branch don't have enough voter influence to have such power as to make laws. Government power is also spread thinly because any function not explicitly outlined in the Constitution is reserved for the states. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution makes this clear. This concept is called federalism. Besides keeping the scope of federal government small, it allows each state to run experiments without subjecting the rest of the country to their laws. For instance, say Colorado legalized marijuana, then other states could say, "Oh dear, look at the increase in crime and homelessness. We don't want to do that." Additionally, people could move out of Colorado to another state where their rights are still protected under the Constitution, but their personal values are reflected better. So that's the 10th Amendment. It's the last amendment in the Bill of Rights. Maybe it sounds like the Bill of Rights gives you your rights, but it doesn't. Remember? God gives you your rights. The Bill of Rights protects our rights explicitly from the humans running the government. It uses language like, Congress shall make no law, and rights shall not be infringed, not be violated. Governments throughout history have been the worst violators of human rights. I think it's easy to understand the importance of government based on the idea of God-given rights if you compare it to a government that presumes to give man his rights. If you believe men were given their rights by government, then you have to accept that government could take those rights away. Those who give can also take away. Let's talk about private control and ownership of property. Because Marxism is a popular idea today, many people believe private property is not a necessary right. You maybe even sound greedy wanting this right. But remember, property includes the necessities of life and the resources to produce them. You will bow to the will of whoever controls those necessities or die. Without private property, you don't have liberty and you can lose your life. In direct opposition to our Bill of Rights, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights presumes to give humans about 30 rights. In its 29th article, we read, "Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible." The UN secures its power to give you duties. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. You only have rights according to how the humans running the UN define due recognition and respect, and the requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. You can only exercise your rights in the way that the humans at the UN say you can. That should not make you feel free or safe, but maybe it makes you really appreciate our Constitution and have a desire to defend it. I'm not aware of any other country that recognizes that rights come from God and that government's only function is to protect those rights. In Freedom First Society materials, you will often see our opposition to involvement in regional arrangements and the United Nations. If you know nothing else about regionalization or the United Nations, remember that the nations we combine with in those governing bodies do not recognize that people's rights come from God. We will always be in the minority amid all the world's governments that presume to give people their rights, and we could be subjected to their overruling decisions. Maybe you've noticed that the solution presented by the media for every problem is for the U.S. to combine with the other nations of the world. There's an obvious, well-organized effort to drive us into world government, where God-given rights are not recognized. Freedom First Society documents this very well. Get more informed about how you can preserve freedom at freedomfirstsociety.org. When I was in high school history class, I raised my hand and I asked the teacher, "Why did our Congress turn down the League of Nations?" And she said, "They're a bunch of isolationists." And I raised my hand and I said, "Why were they a bunch of isolationists? What was their reasoning?" She couldn't tell me. Of course she couldn't tell me, because she would have had to explain everything we just learned about, and that would involve mentioning God. But besides that, I'm not sure she knew what you all now know about what makes Americanism so unique and why it needs to be guarded so carefully. Now it's time for a little quiz. How much did you learn? Question number 1. Who gave you your rights? Number 2. Which U.S. document recognizes the source of your rights? Number 3. The U.S., fill in the blank, binds down, fill in the blank, to secure your rights. Question 4. When we delegate, fill in the blank, to government, we do not relinquish it. Number 5. When you sanction government to do something, it is as though you were doing it, fill in the blank. Number 6. Anything you cannot legally do as an individual, a just, fill in the blank, cannot do either. Question 7. Only the, fill in the blank, branch has power to make laws. Question 8. If you believe men were given their rights by government, then you must also accept that government, fill in the blanks. Question 9. Fill in the blank, is necessary for life and liberty. Question 10. True or false? The United Nations presumes to give humans their rights. Question 11. True or false? In its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations retains the power to take away human rights. Last question. What is Americanism? Let's see how you did. First of all, God gave you your rights. And the Declaration of Independence is the U.S. document which recognizes the source of our rights, God. And it's the U.S. Constitution that binds down government to secure your rights. When we delegate authority to government, we do not relinquish it. When you sanction government to do something, it is as though you were doing it yourself. Anything you cannot legally do as an individual, a just government cannot do either. Only the legislative branch has power to make laws. If you believe men were given their rights by government, then you must also accept that the government can take those rights away. Private property is necessary for life and liberty. It is true that the United Nations presumes to give humans their rights. It is also true that in its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations retains the power to take away human rights. Americanism is the belief that rights are given to man by God and that government's only purpose is to secure those rights. Would you agree that Americanism is something that everyone needs to understand? Share what you've learned today. Take a deeper dive into saving the Constitution and our country at freedomfirstsociety.org. In our next lesson, we will learn about systems of government and the political spectrum. Thank you for joining us for this presentation.